what you expect at the end of this semester. So the course outline is displayed on your screen, as you can see. And the first topic we are going to talk about is the meaning and role of communication. So under the meaning and role of communication, you will be able to understand the definition of communication. The other thing that we'll also be able to talk about during that class or during our interaction will be the role of communication. We'll also be able to talk about the interpersonal relationship. How do people relate when they are talking to each other? So it is important to understand and know that when you're talking to a person, it is always important for you to interrelate. Then the second topic will be the process of effective communication. Remember, communication is a process. So you don't wake up in the morning and start communicating. You have to ensure that you follow a certain procedure or a certain process. Then the other thing that we'll also talk about is the barriers to effective communication. So communication sometimes can be hindered with various factors. We also need to understand some of these barriers to effective communication. The other thing that is very critical is how to overcome those barriers when it comes to effective communication. So you'll be able to understand some of those barriers and how well we are going to overcome those barriers. Then our third topic will be the principles of effective communication. When we talk about communication, what are some of the principles that you need to understand? It is very critical that for effective communication to take place, there are some principles that you have to follow that are very critical in ensuring that your communication is effective. We shall also define what is a sentence, and when you're writing a sentence, what are some of the issues? What are some of the structures? Kamau, please unmute.
Yes. Hello.
It's okay, let's continue. Yes, then our next topic will be summary writing. You will be able to understand how you summarize work when you are writing or when you are reading. It is always important for you to understand how to summarize some of these things. Then we shall also talk about summarization of passage. How can you summarize a passage? A passage is something, for example, when you're reading a book or when you're reading a story, how are you going to summarize? You also need to understand how to summarize a speech. When somebody is giving a speech, how well are you going to summarize that speech? At some point, you also need to understand report and correspondence. When you're writing a report or when you're writing a correspondence, you need to understand what you really need to do. Then we have forms of business correspondence, types of business correspondence, description of business correspondence, and curriculum vitae. When you're writing your CV, what are some of the things that you need to understand? Then the meeting also is very critical. Here you will be able to understand how to define a meeting. So the definition of a meeting. And this is a very common term when it comes to the office. You hear people say that I'm going to attend this meeting, I'm going to attend such and such a meeting. So you need to understand. You also need to understand the different types of meetings. So we have different types of meetings. We have business meetings, we have friendship meetings. And when we reach that point, we'll be able to talk about some of those meetings. We shall also be required to understand the purpose of a meeting. So we have those meetings that basically are about solving a certain problem. So basically they are called brainstorming meeting. And the main purpose is for you to be able to understand how you are going to solve a certain issue that has arisen in the organization. Then we have different terminologies that are used in a meeting. Then we shall also understand how to prepare for a meeting and some of the procedures that are required when you're conducting a meeting. And lastly, the advantages and disadvantages of meetings. We shall also be talking about the interviews. How do you conduct an interview? So we'll be able to understand the definition of interviews. Sometimes we have, you can go and you are seeking for employment and you are given an interview. So what is an interview? You need to understand the definition. We shall also be able to understand the types of interviews. The types of interviews. We have job interviews. We have these other ones that are done by the media interviews and what have you. Will be able to understand all that. Then we shall also be talking about the roles of the interviewer in an interview. So what is the role of an interviewer in an interview? So you also be able to understand that. We shall also be able to conduct an interview. What are some of the steps? When you are conducting an interview, what are you supposed to do at the end of the day? Then the challenges of an interview. So what are some of the challenges that you face during an interview? We shall also be able to understand the reports, how to define a report, some of the types of reports that are very critical in the organization. We have the purpose of the reports. We'll also be talking about the structure and the content of reports and how to prepare reports and present those reports. Remember, reports are normally required to be presented. So how should you represent or present those reports? It is always important for you to be able to understand some of these things. Then we shall also talk about the forms of communication, the various forms of communication, some of the types of communication, the importance of those forms of communication and the barriers of those forms of communication and how well we are going to overcome some of those barriers. Then we shall also talk about the emerging trends in communication, and at the end of the day, we will be able to communicate some of those emerging trends and how well we can fix the emerging trends when it comes to effective communication. Some of the references that you are going to use, number one, you will be able to use Salemi communication. So Salemi is an author, it's normally called N.A. Salemi, and he has talked more about communication. We shall also be able to use magazines, and we shall also be able to use the articles and journals, and you'll be able to learn more about that. So we will start. So what is communication? What is communication? You hear people say communication, communication, communication. So what is communication? So communication is a process of exchanging ideas among two or more persons. So when you're exchanging ideas or when you're exchanging thoughts, then that is communication. And for communication to be effective, there has to be two people or more than two people for that communication to be effective. Communication achieves its objective when the parties involved understand each other. So those parties must be able to understand each other for that communication to be effective. And one of the things that is very critical is that we must use a language that both parties are able to understand. So communication can also be defined as giving, receiving, or exchange of information, opinions, or ideas by writing, speech, or visual means, so that the material communicated is completely understood by everyone. So the second definition is talking about another, it is adding on the first one, which was to exchange ideas. This one is talking about giving, receiving, and exchange of information. One party must be able to give, the other party must be able to receive the information, and the other party must be able to exchange that information. And this information basically can be opinions that people want to exchange. It can be an idea by writing. So there has to be some aspect of writing. And sometimes you also give a speech, and the other people are able to visualize and understand that speech. And once they understand that speech, they'll be able to acknowledge what you really meant about the speech. Then so that the material communicated is completely understood by everyone concerned. So both parties must be able to understand the message that you want to communicate. And once they understand this, it becomes easier for you to be able to communicate. Then the other thing that we are going to talk about is that communication is the process by which information is passed between individuals by means previously agreed or symbols. So you must be able to agree which symbol you are going to use. You must be able to agree which medium you are going to use for you to be able to communicate to the best way possible, so that both parties will be able to understand what you mean. So communication, from the Latin communicare, means that it is an activity of conveying information through the exchange of ideas, feelings, intentions, attitudes, expectation, perception, or command, as by speech, gesture, writing, behavior, and possibly by other means such as electromagnetic, chemical, or physical phenomena. So according to the Latino communicare, they give another view of communication, whereby they are saying that communication is conveying information through the exchange of idea. So you must be able to exchange an idea or a feeling or an intention or your attitude, and at the end of the day, expectation, what you expect, what you perceive, or what you command, by a form of giving a speech, or you can also use gestures or signs, or sometimes you can be forced to write or have a certain behavior that will have a meaning. And one of the things that the Latin communicare insists on is the use of electromagnetic or chemical or physical phenomena. So you can be able to use any electronic means, so that at the end of the day, you'll be able to reach your audience when you are communicating. So it is the physical phenomena. It is the meaningful exchange of information between two or more participants. So when you talk about physical, when we meet, two of us or more than two people meet together so that they want to share a certain information, then we can say at the end of the day, those people are communicating. They can either use machines or organisms or their part. So when you are talking about exchange of information, it is not necessarily that you meet physically. You can also use phones, or you can also decide to use machines. And nowadays we have even Skype and WhatsApp. When you are calling your friends, basically you want to share a certain information using that platform. And for communication to be successful, there are some components that are very critical. And some of those components include, there has to be a sender. A sender is the person who encodes the message, who has the idea, and that idea wants to be communicated. And there has to be a message. So the sender is the one that conceives the message. The idea is normally put on paper through a certain media. And media in this case can either be print media, or it can be this other medium, or it can be a phone or a laptop, or any medium that you want to use, or email. And there has to be a recipient. A recipient is the person who receives the message, and the person must be able to decode the message. And once he decodes the message, he will be able to read it and understand that message. And once that person understands the message, he will be able to deliver. Excuse me for a minute, kindly. Excuse kidogo tu. So I want to explain, this is a typical example of the communication process where we have the sender. And the sender basically is the person who has the thoughts or the ideas in his head. And he wants to put the idea on the mind, so that that idea is put on paper. So once the sender formulates those ideas in the head, he will be able to communicate the message through a certain media. So encoding the message is writing the message in a language that the receiver will be able to understand. For example, you have an idea of sending a message maybe to a teacher, and you wanted the teacher to understand the message. Maybe you are not going to attend class today. So first of all, you'll be able to understand the idea first that you want to communicate. So you'll be able to write that message in a language that your teacher will be able to understand. And that is why we are saying encode the message through a certain media. Maybe you'll be using your phone as a medium. So the phone is your medium. So once you write that message in your phone, you'll be able to send the message to the receiver. And the receiver in this sense is the teacher who is going to receive the message. So here we are talking about the student. The student is the one who's sending the message, encoding the message, and basically giving meaning to that message. And once you give meaning to the message, you'll be able to send it on your phone or an email, or you can decide to send a letter to the teacher. The teacher will be able to decode the message. You'll be able to read that message and understand the message. And once you understand the message, you'll be able to give what's called a feedback. And this feedback basically will show that the message has been completely understood by the various parties. But if the person does not give feedback, then it means there is a problem on the message. Maybe the receiver did not receive the message, or maybe the receiver did not understand the message. So it is very important for you to be able to give feedback so that it shows that indeed the message has been received and it is complete. Is that okay? So if that is okay, we want to continue. We want to continue. So the other thing we will talk about is so communication requires a sender, a message, a medium, and a recipient, although the receiver does not So the communication requires the sender, a message, a medium, and a recipient, although the receiver does not have to be present or aware of the sender's intention. So the receiver is not even supposed to know your intention as to why maybe you are writing the message or why you want to compose the message. Then communication can occur across vast distance in time and space. So you can send a message to a person who is far away, maybe using an SMS, or you can decide to use an email. Communication requires that the communicating parties share an area of communicative commonality. The communication process is complete once the receiver understands the sender's message. And communicating with others involves 3 primary steps. So some of the steps that you need to understand when you are communicating. Number 1, thoughts. The first information exists in the mind of the sender. So the mind of the sender is the one that composes the message first of all. Then once you compose the message in your mind, this can be a concept, idea, or information, or a certain feeling that you want to express, but it all starts with your thoughts. Then encoding is the next thing. A message is sent to a receiver in a word, other symbols. So you can decide to send the message maybe by use of words or giving symbols so that those symbols are able to be understood by both parties. Then the other one is decoding. The receiver translates the words or the symbols into a concept or information that a person can understand. So once you receive the message as a receiver, you'll be able to translate that message in the best way possible and how well you can understand the message that is shared to you. Then once you understand the message, then the last thing that you need to do is to give a feedback that indeed I received the message, I read it, and I understood the message. There are a variety of verbal and non-verbal forms of communication. This includes body language, non-verbal communication, body language. How you put your body when you're communicating sometimes is very critical. How you move your body can be able to communicate a certain message, maybe to the receiver or to the person that you're communicating with. Then the other thing is the eye contact. Remember, when you're communicating, it is always important to focus on the eyes, the eye contact. You must be able to look straight in the eyes when you are communicating so that the person will be able to understand what you really mean. The person must be able to understand exactly what you really mean. Then the other important thing is communication, sign language. Sometimes you also need to use sign language and haptic communication or chronemics. Chronemics, it is always important for you to use such signs and symbols, or you can also use demonstrations if possible, so that each and every person is able to understand you. Other examples are the media content, such as pictures, graphics, sounds, and writings. And the other one is the conventional rights of persons with disability, people living with disabilities. Remember, there are also people that need to understand how you communicate. And that is why when you are watching the media, sometimes you find that we have some people who are using sign languages to be able to communicate with some of those people who do not have the ability to maybe hear or the ability sometimes to talk. They normally use the sign languages, which is a very critical area that needs to be taken into consideration. So after talking about that, we need to understand what is effective communication. When somebody says, I'm communicating, what does that person mean? Effective communication is simply the transmission of message to another person in such a way that the recipient is able to interpret exactly what the sender's intention was and receive at the right time. So when you're talking about effective communication, you must be able to transmit the message in the best way possible so that both parties are able to understand and interpret the intention of the other party. And these parties that we are talking about is the sender and the receiver. So it is always important for you to be able to use a platform or to use a language that both parties are going to benefit and be able to understand. Some of those issues that are very critical when you want to effect communication, number one is correct timing. So you must be able to correctly time. At what time are you communicating the message? Sometimes when people are happy, you can't bring sad moments. So you must be able to understand the exact time that you want to communicate. You must also be logical in your thinking. Logic is all about bringing meaning to what you want to communicate about. Sometimes you cannot bring jokes in a serious matter because it is going to be as if you are not a serious person. Then the other important thing is fluent expression. So you must be very fluent in what you are talking about. For example, if you want to talk in English, make sure you use English. Be consistent in what you communicate so that people are able to understand what you exactly are talking about. You also need to be carefully read and listen. A good communication must be able to be understood Therefore, your listening skills must also be very, very appropriate. Sometimes they normally say that a good communicator must be able to listen a lot and talk little. Then also be very sensitive when it comes to circumstances. So when you're dealing with circumstances, it is very, very critical for you to be able to consider the circumstance that you are going to communicate. Then ensure that you make a choice. Ensure you make a choice of the appropriate media, the tone and the style that you want to communicate. For example, when you are dealing in a business meeting, there's a way you must talk in a business meeting. For example, when you are going to communicate maybe in a ceremony, there's a certain tone that you must use. And you also need to use appropriate medium. For example, you are applying for a job. It is always good to use an email. So you cannot use WhatsApp when you are applying for a certain job, because those people will not take you seriously. Then the other thing is obtaining feedback to check the message has been understood. And that is why sometimes if you don't receive a feedback in a certain message that you sent, maybe in a few hours ago, you always sometimes do not feel good because you feel indeed that message was not well delivered. And that is why it is always encouraged that you must be able to get feedback in what you communicate. Then we also need to embrace information and communication technology. Information may be the main focus of communication. So if you don't have information, then what are you going to communicate about? So it is always important for you to be able to get information. And once you have the information, it becomes easier for you as the communicator to be able to initiate the message. So the communicator may want to initiate some actions. So once you have the information, it is always easy for you to initiate the action. And if you don't have information, then it becomes difficult for you to do that. Then the other thing is to make his needs understood. So the communicator also requires that what he really needs is able to be understood by all the parties. Then you also need to talk about to share ideas, attitude, beliefs, and perhaps persuading others to embrace them. Maybe you want to share some ideas. So it is always important for you to be able to ensure your ideas are well understood. Maybe it is an attitude that you want to express or some kind of belief. It is always important for you to be able to use a proper way so that all the parties are able to understand you. Then sometimes you want to persuade somebody to do a certain thing. So it is always important for you to use the best skills that you have to be able to communicate in a way that you will be able to persuade people to embrace what you really wanted to pass. Then it is always important to establish and maintain the links with others or other people, possibly to ascertain them. So you must be able to create the link between yourself as the communicator and other people. So you must be able to formulate some of those links that will enable you to be able to communicate more effectively. Any question? Why? Why?
I'm okay.
Oh, you're okay? Yes, come out.
Okay, I had a question on about feedback.
Yes.
Don't know whether I'll be able to see it now.
Lisa sauti kidogo, come out.
Okay, I'm checking a question on feedback. What maybe the importance of feedback?
Or the importance of feedback.
Yeah. Why do you need
Feedback is
the
very
feedback?
important because
Yeah.
number one, remember these are two people who are communicating.
Yeah.
You are communicating maybe with somebody and you really wanted that person to know that indeed you received the message. So it is always important for you to give feedback so that it shows that indeed the receiver was able to receive your message. The receiver read your message and the receiver understood your message. And that is why he was able to give feedback to you so that the message becomes complete. Hata kama niwe Kamau, for example, ulikuwa unatumia mtu message, maybe ako na deni yako,
Yes.
umekaa chini karibu dakika 10, ukaandika message, alafu na expect atasoma, akuambia atakulipa lini, na akose kukutumia. Utasikia aje kama ni wewe? Utasema maybe hakuona message yake. Na unaona kwa WhatsApp ame blue tick, so unaona ame blue tick na haja receive message. Utasema ujamani mkora. So utatafuta simu nyingine ujaribu kumpigia uone kama atashika. Cause inasema ame blue tick na haja respond. Sawa?
Yeah.
Yes, Mwai yuko sawa. Hello. Kevin. So effective communication in care setting helps both care workers and people who use care services to form good relationship and to work well together. So people communicate most effectively when they feel relaxed and are able to empathize with the other person's experience, warmth, and genuineness in their relationship. So when I was talking about the workplace, sometimes when you are communicating with your co-workers, sometimes when you're communicating with maybe your employees or employer, it is always important for you to be able to build a certain kind of experience or relationship that will be able even to increase your morale as employees when you're working. So it is always important when you feel relaxed and you have the empathize, you empathize. Basically, you are in that other person's shoes. It becomes easier for you to be able to understand the other person and be able to relate with the other person more easily and more freely. So effective communication also requires that care workers will be able to develop and use a range of skills, abilities, and communication techniques. So communication is very critical. You must be able to have a certain technique when you're communicating so that those people will be able to understand what you say. You also need to have some various skills that are very critical when you are communicating. Then we also talk about skills. Communication is all about skills. You must be able to develop certain skills when you're communicating. And remember, we talked about the eye contact. We talked about your posture when you're communicating, which is very, very critical. Then communication technique is very, very critical. And some of those techniques may include active listening. You must be able to actively listen to what your other party is saying. And if you don't listen, then you might end up understanding the wrong message. And this might bring issues at the end of the day. And that is why they normally say a good communicator is a good listener. You must always listen to what the other party is saying. And the more you listen, the more you'll be able to understand what the other party really wants or expects from you. A person who uses active listening pays close attention to what the other person is saying. So you'll be able to pay close attention. Just a minute.
We can't hear you. Good evening. Galaxy S8, kindly use your full names and ID number. P. Moy and B. Kamau, use your official names. Kindly.
Kindly rename your names so that we are able to know exactly who you are. B. Kamau.
Yes.
And P. Moy.
Boniface.
Just rename your phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Galaxy. For you to be a good communicator, you must be able to have good listening skills. This is because the more you listen, the more you will be able to learn more on what your other party is talking or what your other party is saying. So a person who uses active listening pays close attention to what the other person is saying and notices the nonverbal messages they are communicating. So basically, when you listen a lot, you'll be able to understand what your other colleague or your other party is really communicating about. And once you understand that, then the message will be very, very effective. So people who are good at active listening also tend to be skilled at using minimum prompt. So you will not be able to interrupt when the other party is communicating. Then the other important technique is the use of body language and proximity. So how you use your body when you're communicating, sometimes you'll be able to send a certain message, maybe to the other party. So it is always important for you to understand the environment in which you are communicating. And once you understand that environment, it becomes easier for you to be able to communicate with the other party. So people use different forms of body languages to communicate feelings and to support what they want actually. So effective communication often uses the solar behavior when they are sitting down talking to another person. These are not hard and fast rules that must always be obeyed, but they do encourage more open communication. So how you behave during your communication, how you move your body sometimes has a very critical message that you want to send to the other party. So you must be able to maintain even your proximity, your distance to the other person so that it shows the impact that you want to achieve in terms of communication. Then an awareness of proximity. The amount of personal space that a person requires is also an important feature of effective communication. So when you want to communicate to a certain person, it is not always important, or you are not supposed to be close to that person. Usimkaribie sana. Unajua kuna watu wengine wanaogopanga wanapokaribiwa, sometimes mtu ana feel insecure or that person feels unease. So you also need to maintain your distance. Don't be too close to that person or don't be too far away to that person. Maintain a distance that you'll be able to communicate more effectively and more easily. Sitting or standing too close to someone can make them feel uncomfortable and sometimes they might feel intimidated, and that is not the intention of communication. And that is why it is always important to maintain 1.5 meters or 1.5 distance to the other person. Sitting too far away can make the person feel isolated and might seem unfriendly. So it's not always important for you to sit far away from that person because it might make you feel very unfriendly. This guy, kwa nini ameniambia nikae mbali? Sometimes you might end up asking many questions, and this might be very hard for you. And sometimes you might not even get answers as to why that person was so far away from you. The other thing is the care of workers. Care workers often adjust their proximity by moving their chairs or their position in response to the person's body language. Sometimes you find people, if you are far away, some people might tend to move your chairs closer to you so that at least they become closer to you so that they'll be able to understand and even clearly hear what you really wanted to communicate. It can also be a good idea to ask, is it okay if I sit here? So sometimes it is always good. If you feel you are not comfortable, don't keep quiet. Always ask so that they'll be able to understand. What I'm saying here, P. Mwangi, P. Mwai, what I want you to do,
Yes.
I want you to right click on the participants, then you change your name in full, same as Galaxy. Galaxy. I can see Boniface Njia Kamau has done that. Yes, I was talking about proximity.
And he was also saying that we do our registration numbers. What if you don't know your registration number?
You can still use the name. The name is okay,
Okay.
Yeah. So let's continue. So some of those things that are very critical when you're talking about proximity. Number one, you need to adapt an open posture. So you must be able to adapt a posture that is very open, a posture that you are also free when you are talking to the other party. You also do not need to lean towards the other person. So you must be able to maintain free space. Don't lean to another person. It is very unofficial way of talking about proximity. Then maintain eye contact. That one is very, very critical. You must be able to maintain the eye contact. And when you want to know that somebody is cheating, it is always important for you to look straight in the eye and you'll realize that that person is not straight. Maintaining eye contact is very critical. You also need to try to relax while paying attention. So don't be so anxious. You need to relax. And once you relax, you'll be able to understand more when you are communicating. You also need to maintain your facial expression and eye contact. So you must be able to smile. You know, some people are very serious. They cannot even afford a smile. And that is very, very dangerous. So it is always important for you to be able to understand and maintain your facial expression. Smile to the other party. Don't be too serious. Life is too short. The human face is very expressive and it is an important source of nonverbal communication. So your face sometimes can give many meanings. And the way you do your facial expression sometimes can send a wrong impression or can send a wrong message. A person's face usually reveals their feelings. So you cannot hide your feelings. Once somebody looks at you, they'll be able to understand what you really mean by just looking at you, by just looking at your face. Sometimes when you're too serious, people know that, hey, huyu jamaa leo, huyu jamaa yuko sawa, jamaa ko very serious. Sometimes when you're happy, you cannot hide it when somebody looks at your face. Sometimes when you're sad, you cannot avoid it. However, sometimes people are able to distinguish their true feelings and present a social acceptable behavior. Some people are so cunning. Saa yenye amekasirika, amefurahi. Saa yenye amefurahi, amekasirika. So you cannot be able to know. So human beings are also very cunning. Hawezi jua na feel aje. And that is why it is always important to talk to each other. Ndio mtu at least ukimjua vizuri, anaweza open up. Kuna watu wanapitia shida huku nje. Mtu ako na shida lakini hawezi kukuambia. Unaona tu ako sawa, ako sawa, ako sawa. Ile siku yenye ataamua aongee, ndio utajua yenyewe maisha ni gumu. Effective communications are able to read. Effective communicators are able to read and interpret other people's facial expression and are also good at using facial expression. So sometimes it is always important for you. If you are a good communicator, you will be able to understand what the other party is doing or what the other party is up to by just looking at the face. So we have those people who are always good at looking at the expression of the other person and be able to convey what they mean, to convey their emotions so that they'll be able to interpret some of those emotions. A person's eyes and the eye contact they make can also be a good indicator of their feelings. Remember those days when we used to tulikuwa tunatafuta watu sometimes, ulikuwa unaangalia macho, unaona yenyewe anafikiria nini. And once umeangalia macho, you can be able to know if that other party anadanganya ama adanganyi. Sometimes when you go out with your friends and you look straight in their eyes, you can be able to understand their reactions when it comes to the issues of paying of the bills. Mtu anaona bill anasema so unaangalia macho sometimes, you'll be able to understand what that person exactly is up to. Yes, a person who makes eye contact for longer than is socially expected and who widens their eyes is likely to be seen as friendly, especially if they do as they smile. So sometimes the eye contact can also mislead you. You might think the person is okay, or might think the person is happy, but that person maybe is sad. Sometimes the eye contact can also mislead you. Then a person who makes the eye contact for long, especially if they smile, effective communicators use eye contact to people. Effective communicators use eye contact to let people know they are paying attention, to establish trust and provide assurance. So when you're talking to a person, you also need to look at the eye contact. And if that person is looking you straight in the eyes, then it means that person is paying attention to you. Then it means that person, you can be able to establish some level of trust to that person, some kind of assurance that this person indeed is hearing what I'm saying, and this person is going to maybe build some level of trust, and then assurance. You'll be able to create assurance. Sometimes when you're talking to a person and that person is not even looking at you, then it means that person is not paying attention, and that is very dangerous to you. Then the other thing is appropriate language, tone, and pace. Your tone also can be able to send some kind of messages. A person's choice of words as well as the way they speak influences effective communication. This is because the way you talk sometimes might have an influence to the message that you want to perceive or the message that you want to pass to the other person. The pace, tone, the pitch, the volume of the speaker's voice are very, very important. Sometimes when you talk with a tone that is very high, maybe you are angry, or maybe you are not okay. Or sometimes when you are talking at a low pitch, it might send a different message. So that tone is very, very important for you to be able to watch it as a communicator, so that at the end of the day, we'll be able to, the other party must be able to understand what exactly you mean when they hear your tone when speaking. Sometimes when you are talking in low tones, or when you're mumbling, it means there is something that is not correct. Maybe when a lecturer is teaching in class and you're busy mumbling, then it means you did not understand a certain concept in class. Or maybe you want some clarification. Or sometimes the kind of behavior is likely to draw attention away from the verbal message or content of what is being said. Mumbling, speaking too quickly, failing to complete sentences, and using a hostile or aggressive tone will also impair the effectiveness of communication. So you must be able to watch your tone. Sometimes it is always important to also study the mood of your communication, the kind of audience that you want to communicate to. It is also very, very important. It is important to speak clearly and at a pace that the other person can follow. So don't speak too fast and the other party is not able to follow you. Don't speak too slow and the other party gets confused along the way. You must be able to maintain a tempo in your communication. Effective communication also avoids using slang, jargons, and acronyms. So don't use slang. Slang ni hizi mashengs zenye watu wanaongeaga sana. Or unatumia jargons, hard words that the other party sometimes becomes hard for that other party to be able to understand those jargons. Kutumia maneno ngumu ya kizungu. And sometimes you are not supposed to use symbols. For example, unasema KRA. Maybe you want to know what is KRA. Or maybe you are using a SAP, as soon as possible. Maybe in a bit, in a short, in a while. Unajua vitu kama hizo. Don't use such acronyms, because this will prevent misunderstanding developing. So when you use those acronyms, sometimes it might be difficult for the other party to understand you. And for you to prevent that, don't use them. Speaking in a measured, clear, and reasonable pace manner will help the listener to hear and understand what is being said. So you'll be able to understand what is being said at the end of the day. And once you understand that, then you are good to go as the receiver of the message. Speaking in a measured, clear, and reasonable manner or pace will help the listener to hear and understand what is being said. A relaxed, encouraging, and friendly tone of the voice also will help the speaker to convey warmth, sincerity, and appropriate respect for the listener. So you'll be able to understand clearly, and both parties will be able to benefit from what you really meant in the message. Then the other one is clarifying or repeating. So an effective communication may clarify or repeat aspects of what the other person has said during the conversation as a way of checking their understanding. So sometimes it's always important to the communicator to repeat as a form of clarifying what they were talking about. And once you repeat, then the other party will be able to understand more and more. And the other thing about repeating sometimes is to check if whether the other parties or the person was able to understand what you meant when communicating. They might, for example, repeat some of the speaker's words directly back to them to check that they have understood or summarized the person's message. Sometimes it is always important for the communicator to repeat words as the listener also repeats, so that the listener or the communicator will be able to understand is if indeed the listeners were able to understand what you meant. This is sometimes done to pick up and explore the main points or key issues the person is concerned with. So it helps you to be able to understand the key issues, or you also need to give a summary of your speech or a summary of your communication so that the other parties are able to know or they are able to understand if indeed the communicator was communicating effectively. If they don't respond, then it means they were not able to understand what you meant, or they were not following what you really meant at the end of the day. So next time when we come, we shall be talking about the benefits of effective communication. So what can you benefit out of effective communication? So it is always important for you to benefit at the end of the day. Yes, Paul Moy. Any question?
I was thinking about the posture.
The posture, yes, posture.
Yeah, during the promiscuity awareness.
Yes.
I was thinking about the posture.
Yes, yes, about the posture.
Should it really matter when we are dealing with communication? Posture, I think posture is the sitting position, or am I?
The posture can either be the sitting position. It can either be how you stand. Maybe you are standing and you are communicating. It is also very important to maintain your posture when you are standing, or when you are sitting down also. It is also good for you to also maintain this posture. For example, when you are attending an interview, it is not good for you to sit as if you must be upright when you are seated, so that the other party also will be able to. Do you know the body language also? It's very critical for you, the body language. For example, when you're talking to your boss and maybe you are seated down, na umekaa kwa sofa set. Unajua kuna wenye unaweza kaa mpaka ashangae, kwani huyu ni wa wapi? So you also need to maintain your posture. Sometimes also when you're standing with your boss, stand at stand straight. Usi stand at akimbo. Stand straight.
Okay.
Yeah, Boniface.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Yes, I have a question on.
Yes.
Why would a manager prefer to use face-to-face communication?
Prefer to
use face-to-face.
Face-to-face communication.
Yeah, to the junior staff.
Yes.
That is one question. Then then I also had some issues.
Yes.
Some additional areas that I would like you to cover.
Yes.
On the course outline.
Yes.
These are the questionnaire.
Yes.
Then writing of a notice.
Writing of a notice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then the issue of telephone message form.
Telephone
message form.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the issues.
So in the course outline, you are saying the writing of notice is not there, or the telephone message?
At the questionnaires.
Oh, that is the question.
No, those are the additional points on the course outline.
Yes.
The question was,
yes,
why a manager would prefer
yes,
to use face-to-face communication with the junior staff.
So face-to-face communication. Remember, when we are talking about face-to-face, it means you are able to see the other party face-to-face. So managers recommend the face-to-face communication because you'll be able to even see the reactions of your staff. And the staff will also be able to understand your message more. For example, when a manager is in front of you and the manager is talking, sometimes you can also be able to understand the environment, the reaction of your manager. And that is why they recommend face-to-face communication as a way of even letting your employees know what you really meant in your message. So if you don't do that, then your employees might not take you serious. When they see your facial expression, umekasirika, they'll be able to indeed understand what you mean. And that is why they always recommend sometimes to meet maybe weekly or maybe after a month, so that you can be able to see their reactions when it comes to issues of delivery in the workplace. So writing a notice and telephone messages, that one I did not understand what you meant. Are they additional in the course outline or?
Okay, now.
Yes.
When I'm looking at the past papers.
Oh, the past papers.
I can see questions about the questionnaire.
Oh yeah, questionnaire.
And even telling you to write a notice.
Oh, notice.
Yeah, and even asking you.
We shall be able to revise there, and I believe you'll understand once we reach there. So we will be able to also revise how to write a notice and how to write a telephone message. And when you're writing a telephone message, it also depends with who are you writing to. When you're writing to a friend, it is totally different when you are writing maybe an office message. When you're writing an office message using a telephone, sometimes it is always important for you to be official. You can either start by saying good afternoon or good morning, or you can say good morning, sir, or good morning, madam, depending on the person that you want to address the message to. But when you're writing to a friend, you can use any format. Hola. The other one about writing a notice. When you're writing a notice, you also need to tell us who the notice is addressed to. You must be able to know which this notice is meant for employees. Is it meant for the management? Is it meant for the general staff? You also need to tell us the address of the notice. And the notice must be very, very, very brief and in a language or in a language that everybody, in an easy language that everybody is able to understand. So don't use jargons when you're writing a notice. And notice basically arises from maybe a situation that has, for example, this situation of the pandemic. Maybe in your workplaces, they've been able to give you some notices. Maybe you're not supposed to go to work, or you're supposed to work from the office, things like that. So during that revision, we'll be able to understand how to write a notice. Is that okay, Boniface?
Yeah. The question on questionnaire.
Yes.
I've seen it. It is saying it is a 2019 paper.
Yes.
And it is asking.
Yes.
State 3 circumstances.
Yes.
Under which a questionnaire may be used to correct information.
Oh, and circumstances.
Yeah, under which a questionnaire may be used to correct information.
So sometimes it depends. Let's give a scenario of a company that wants to start a new product. So they can decide to form questionnaires so that the customers are going to answer based on the product. Maybe they've tested the product, which was a dummy product, and you want to collect information concerning the product. So sometimes you can decide to use questionnaires so that you can be able to get the reactions of your customers concerning the product that you want to launch. So sometimes you can use questionnaires, maybe you want to get reactions from customers about the service of the employees. So you can decide to give questionnaires, random questionnaires to certain customers, so that you can get the reactions of those employees or some of the reactions of the customers. Or sometimes you want to collect feedback from your customers about certain services that you offer. So you can be able to formulate the questionnaire so that your customers will be able to fill those questionnaires. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, Mwai. Mwai? Yes, yes.
Niko salama.
Kwa salama. Kevin Okeyo. Kevin Okeyo.
Kevin ametupotelea leo.
Nani huyo? Yes, Kevin. Kevin aski. Unajua amesimama. So let's stop there for today because of the curfew. I also need to rush. So let's meet on Friday.
Friday?
Yeah, Friday.
Friday.
For communication, eh? I'll end the meeting and let's meet.
So Saturday classes will be...
Saturday we shall meet at 7, eh?
Okay.
7 is okay.
It's okay.
For a double lesson.
Nasisi.
Aya.
Nasisi.
Yeah?
Nasisi kesho.
Kesho ni ICT.
Kesho si tuko na ICT theory sisi wote.
Mko na ICT theory, eh?
Yeah.
Ni sawa.